Hello and welcome to Gaia. In this tutorial I'll show you how to use stampers to make bases. So first we'll create a new environment. And it can just be a standard old 2K environment, doesn't really matter too much. Then what we'll do is we'll use a valley. So we'll just stamp in one of the valleys that comes with Gaia. You prefer one with low areas in the center and high borders. This one looks like the best one. So we'll grab that and drop it in here. Now what we want is a fairly high border. So let's increase we'll turn off ground base and we'll increase our height. Lift it up. Something like that, and maybe get that height going a bit more. Alright, that looks good. So let's stamp this. Now what I'm going to do is rotate the stamp, and it's a bit of an experiment. We'll see how this works. No, all of the areas, I wanted to lift this up. Maybe let's see if we, oh yeah, that'll still lift it up. So let's stamp that again. So let's see what we've got here. It's fairly steep, the borders. That'll do. So now what we want to do is hollow out our base. To do that, we'll just use the terrain utilities themselves. Select our height tool here. Let's make this a bit bigger. Let's make its opacity a bit stronger. And flatten this terrain out. And this area that I'm flattening will be the flat central part of our base. So we want to get all this stuff out. Remember, this is a 2 kilometer terrain, so it's quite large. Let's have a look here. Looking good. Maybe just give it a bit more space here. You know, the more natural you make these borders, the better it will look when it's actually used as a stamp. That's pretty cool. Now the other thing I want to do is increase these heights here, because we're actually going to use this as a stamp to lower the height of the terrain. So I'm going to manually raise this. So I'll select this, select our opacity to be quite low, brush size to be quite high. I still want to keep the underlying detail in the terrain because that'll make for interesting borders, but I do want to lift this up quite high. That's all about the same height. That's the wrong one. Don't love how Unity does that. Let's have a look on the other side. Maybe lift that up over there. And over here. Alright, that's looking, I'll lift that bit up there. Almost done. Okay, so we've got our base stamp. Now, the problem with it at the moment is that the ground is completely flat. And I always like to have a bit of variation in my ground, so I'll go back to my stamper. This time we'll select, say, a hill stamper, something with a little bit of variation in here. And we'll drop its height to, say, 1. So if we go down here now, when we stamp this, we'll have a little bit of variation in this terrain. So let's just drop this down a bit. There we go, stamp this. Cool. Turn off our water and our base, just so we don't need to see it. So now the base of our base got a little bit of detail in it. If you don't want so much detail in it, you can remove a bit. I like it because it works well with the texture, and I think it looks better to have a little bit of variation in your ground, but everybody's different, of course. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is go back to Guy, and we want to turn this terrain into a stamp. To do that, we'll go Advanced, Show Scanner, and we'll drag and drop our terrain onto the scanner. So here's our scanned terrain. We'll drop our base level down to around where the ground level is, and instead of saving this in mountains, we'll save this in ad hoc, and we'll give it a name like base 2, and we'll just save that scan. So now what it's actually done for us is created this new base stamp for us. So let's go and use this. Let's create an interesting environment, and we'll add some bases into it. So to do that, we'll go File, New Scene. We don't need this anymore. That was just so that we could create a shape to use as a shape for our terrain. And we'll just go into our standard workflow, and let's stamp something in here. Get a view of our terrain. So let's use, say, use another one of these valleys. Valley, this one. And let's give it a bit more height. And see how that looks. Oops. Cool, so now we've got this new terrain, and what we want to do is create some bases. Let's create a base over in this part of the environment. So at the moment it's all rugged and mountainous. So what we're going to do is go to our bases, sorry, ad hoc, should have stored it in bases, and we'll drag and drop our base stamp in there. Turn our preview on. Now this is way too big, so let's set its width to, say, 8, so it's a much smaller stamp, and move it over here. Now it's still quite large. I might make it even a bit smaller. Just resize it. So it's smaller. Let's lift it up a bit. Oops, it's grounded, so we'll unground it. So that's the area that will get cut out of our environment. Now let's just take a bit of a look from the top here. This looks about okay, maybe drop it down a bit. Now instead of raising height, we're going to lower height, and what that does is it'll essentially snip this out of the environment. Then the other thing we want to do so that we get nice borders is use a mask. So we use a distance mask, and I'll make the mask fairly, I really want to keep most of the detail in the mask, so we'll make it so that it's quite strong in the center, and then it just fades in fairly quickly. Not my best effort with this, but this will have to do. Pull it down a bit. Okay, so there I've just created a distance mask, so the center of our stamp will be subtracting or lowering height at full strength, and as we get to the borders of our stamp, we'll gradually peter out to nothing. And this will have the effect of creating a nice smooth transition between stamps. So let's go and see what we can do with this. There we can see the bottom of the stamp. Maybe take it down a bit lower and maybe move it in a bit. Okay, and I'll turn off my preview just so we can see it work. Cool, and now we have a base in our environment. And because we made it out of another stamp, we've got some natural terrain features there. That could be a bit harsh for what we want, so let's undo our stamp and modify this and maybe remove some of these keys. Bring it in a bit. There we go, try that one, it's got a more gentle curve. And so that's come in a little bit more gently. So we've created a rather cool little flat area to make our base. Now the next thing we might want to do is maybe make another base over here. Now here's another base that I made earlier, so let's use this one this time. We'll drop that in, turn on our preview and move it. Over to here. Let's remove all of that stuff and create our base. Actually, let's lift it so we have a little bit of interest in there. So now we've got our base. Let's actually make our base a bit bigger by just hitting it again. And maybe bring it over here a bit as well. Oops, wrong button, doesn't matter. Turn our preview back on, move it over. We can rotate it, of course, and make it maybe a bit bigger. Rotate. So you can add in variation too. So this time what I'm doing is I'm going a bit lower than the other one because I want to have multiple levels to my base. So there we go. We've created some interesting base areas for our environment. We've made it multi-level. You can just use your terrain tools to blend between these. So we could do something like, do a bit of a blend, blur. All right, so let's see how this looks when we finish it off. And I'll just do a very, very quick finish. So we'll go in and create our spawners. Let's just quickly texture this. While it's texturing, we'll add in via our extensions, we'll add Aquos. Now I know which parts of Gaia is being affected by what, so some things you shouldn't do and some things you can. I would normally do this one step at a time. So I'll add in Aquos, we'll add in Enviro, add Enviro, set player, add Enviro, cool, let's set it to noon. And then I'm going to add CTS. CTS will do a lovely job with the rendering of this. Go into our third-party integrations, Nature Manufacture, CTS profile. These beautiful textures come from Nature Manufacture. And we'll just apply this profile. So now we've got a snowy environment. Let's just dial down the snow a bit. Maybe drop the angle, a bit less snow, maybe lift it up a bit in the terrain. There we go. So we've got a bit of snow in our higher areas, and we'll add our, we could do this step by step, but I'm just doing this very, very quickly and showing you different ways of doing it as well. So go into Advanced, Common Game Objects, let's add our character. Because I've got a flying camera selected, that's the character that will be added. Let's add a wind zone, not that we have any trees, and our screenshotter. So Gaia will set all these things up for you. Okay, so let's see what Gaia did for us. Now I can see that the camera is underneath the water, so I'm just going to lift that a bit. There we go. And we'll start this off. Alright, so there is our environment. Here are our nice little flat areas that we've stamped in for our bases. And let's just visually lift this up a bit. Extensions, procedural world, camera and light, create camera effects, and we'll set it. We've got Enviro in here, so that's okay. So there we have it. Nice, interesting environment that we've just created. And some cool bases to create interesting gameplay opportunities. Alright, thanks for watching.